The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 32. The next day I was getting a bad feeling. None of us had heard from Sam, Alex, or Clover all night, and while I wasn't expecting them to keep me updated about what they were doing every second of every day, telling us they were investigating a cult and then not hearing anything was giving me horror movie vibes. But at the same time, I didn't want to overreact and invade a small town with. I did some quick mental addition. 7 capes if I brought everyone. Damn. That was more than most protectorate teams, oddly enough. Reminding myself that I had enough firepower on hand to conquer a small town did a lot to calm me down, and I was able to get through the morning without pacing in circles. That didn't mean that the rest of my group was as calm, though. Still nothing from them? I asked Crystal, who was sitting in the corner, staring at her phone and nibbling on a thumbnail. No messages, and all their phones are turned off. She replied, "I don't like it." I simply nodded. I didn't like it either. 1 or 2 of the girls I could maybe excuse as forgetfulness or bad luck. All 3 when they knew we would want to check up on them later? That meant something happened, or they were in an area where they couldn't use their phones. I'm going to give them till noon to check in. If we don't hear from them by then, we can head into town and look around. Why not now? I started rubbing at my neck. I'm trying to trust them and avoid being a micromanager. They're not helpless, and I don't want them thinking I'm never going to let them do their own thing without breathing down their necks. Crystal nodded, but still looked worried. And if we find out something did happen and we're too late? Something dark burned in my chest, but I did my best to not let it show. Then we deal with it the best we can. And depending on what happens, burn everything they own to the ground and salt the earth behind us. Oh, needless to say, we didn't hear from the girls by noon. At this point, all of us were at least slightly concerned. So we packed up the house and headed down into the town. It was a nice place. Lots of bright brick buildings with colorfully painted trim that reminded me of something out of a Hallmark film. I wouldn't have guessed there was some kind of hidden cult if I hadn't been told about it. But what was worrying was that there were absolutely no other people on the streets despite the time and nice weather. Even if most people decided to stay in for some reason or another, there should have been at least a few that were getting something to eat or running to a store, or people that would be running those stores. But I glanced through the window to what looked like a deli and saw no one at the counter. It was like we had walked into a ghost town. I don't like this. I wasn't sure who whispered that, but I completely agreed with them. Without a single person besides our group on the streets, the town quickly went from Hallmark to horror. And then a church bell went off in the distance, which really didn't help. Anyone want to bet that's where everyone is? I managed to chuckle at Gloria's comment. No, but we should definitely check it out. Is that going to be okay for you guys? Vicky asked from behind us. 'Cause, devils and churches don't really mix? I paused and everyone looked at me. To be honest, I had no clue. On the one hand, I was clearly affected by something resembling the heaven system because invoking Big G's name gave me migraines. But on the other hand, I doubted a normal church would have anything like that backing it up without someone with the ability to do so specifically putting protections down. We should be fine, I said eventually. And if we do run into issues, we can just have Vicky knock down the doors and drag everyone out. Hey! I smiled at her protest and simply walked away. My small jab had done what I wanted and broke up the tension we were all feeling. I could hear some of the others chuckling at the blonde's outburst and making some harmless jabs of their own. It was nice, but unfortunately it didn't last once we got to the church. Unlike the rest of the town, the church was surprisingly dark. It didn't look neglected or anything like that, but the dark brown, almost black wood looked weird against the bright brick surrounding it. The other weird thing was that the doors were standing wide open despite the fact there were still no people anywhere to be seen. What do you think? Trap? Drake asked while we headed over. I don't think so. I replied back, pleased that there was nothing stopping me from entering the building. I guess just being a church wasn't enough to give it any powers over devils like me. If it was, they should have left someone outside just so we weren't as suspicious. Now we know something is wrong and everyone has their guard up. Double bluff? You know something is wrong, so they are counting on nothing being wrong. That doesn't make any sense. Drake gave me the mental equivalent of a shrug. You would know better than I would. Most dragons aren't great at subtlety or complex plans. I didn't say anything to that. I had a feeling there had been plenty of dragons where Drake came from that were perfectly good at those things, and he just never noticed because he was strong enough to bulldoze his way through nearly anything he wanted. No one said anything as we went deeper into the building. I looked into a couple side rooms on a hunch, but just like everywhere else, there was no one there. That didn't matter much, though, since we were soon right outside the main room. If there was anyone here, well, they would be in there. I took a deep breath and threw open the doors to reveal nothing. No one was here either. Now what? Hey, look over there, Gloria trailed off, seemingly deciding to check out whatever she noticed by herself, with Vicky and Eric trailing after her to what looked like a storage cubby. Curious, I decided to follow after them. I didn't even get to look inside before Vicky turned around, shoved Eric out of the way, and called for her sister. Everyone else wisely got out of the way until the mousy brunette went by, and immediately followed after to see what the alarm was about. Since I wasn't too far away, I got a decent look at the three women that had been stuffed into the cubby before everyone started crowding around. All three were tied up and unconscious, but looked otherwise fine, something Amy confirmed after taking some time to investigate the three. Well, I guess we know where Alex, Sam, and Clover went. Crystal sighed. I looked at her. You think they knocked these three out, stole their cult outfits, and went to investigate by themselves? I could see them doing it. Well, someone with magic knocked them out. Amy cut in. All three of them have traces of it on them. You can tell that? Vicky asked my bishop, making me a bit proud of her. She was picking up the basics pretty quickly. More importantly, she was remembering to use them. I had expected to need to check myself because everyone was so new to the idea of having magic, but Amy had beat me to it. Or maybe it was because she was so new to it that she remembered. Either way, I was proud of her for remembering. Yeah, Rias taught us how to sense it. I can't tell what it's doing, but these three have it on them. Should I try removing it? Leave it for now, I ordered. If the girls did put a spell on them, they are definitely part of the cult, and we don't need them alerting the rest somehow. If someone else did, we don't know how their magic works and could end up hurting these three. Amy shrugged. You're the expert. So now what? I opened my mouth to respond, only to come up short. What do we do now? We ended up here because of the bell, but we still didn't know where to go. The only leads we still had were currently busy drooling on each other, and we had literally just talked about how waking them up was dangerous. Would we have to just risk waking them up? Hey, you guys done over there? I found something. I was surprised by the call out. I hadn't even noticed Carl broke off from the group to explore the rest of the room while we all went to check out what Gloria found. But hey, possibly a new lead on where everyone went. Our group wandered over to my pond to see. Okay, is it just me, or is every door we've come across been open for some reason? Eric pointed out. A hidden door leading down to an underground passage. It's not just you. Crystal agreed. Every door we've seen so far has been open, even cabinets and closets. What do you think? Parahuman power or magic? I shrugged because honestly, it could have been either of them, both, or something completely different. I also didn't feel like guessing because we were more likely to guess wrong, and I didn't want to make plans on assumption. Don't know, but I guess we'll find out when we find everyone else. I muttered and started down the stairs. Oh, how the hell did someone build this without someone finding out? I exclaimed several minutes later. We were still heading further down with no sign of anyone around. And considering I was sure we had walked for at least a couple miles already, this was either something someone had devoted years of effort into building, or they had one hell of a support power to dig for miles without anyone noticing. Anything in that book about someone with a tunneling power, Gloria? Nothing yet, but I doubt it. I'm almost finished, and it looks like it's just the typical end of the world. The true believers will inherit the earth type stuff. Gloria had found a book made by the cult in the cubby and had been updating us whenever she found something interesting. The whole thing was a little goofy in my opinion. Another Christian offshoot where a person's importance in the galaxy was determined by the colors of the rainbow, with red being the lowest and violet as the highest. The most interesting thing to me was that the book had actually called out Adam and Eve as only being on the 5th level because of their supposedly blue eyes instead of the most important. They also considered black or tan skin to be the equivalent of indigo for some reason. Of course, I didn't waste much brain power trying to figure that one out because apparently violets were space aliens that were going to come and uplift humanity, so whoever created the cult clearly wasn't working with a full deck of cards. It was interesting to see blonde hair, Blue-eyed Caucasian wasn't the definition of perfection, though. A little refreshing compared to the normal. The rest of the group was having fun trying to argue whether Eric dyeing his hair blue made him a blue or if that was cheating, and if I was at the bottom of the ranking because of my hair or the top because of my eyes. It was harmless fun and a good distraction from the oppressive feeling of walking down a near-featureless tunnel for so long, but at the same time, I really wanted to get to the end and find my 3 wayward pawns. Who knows what those 3 had gotten wrapped up in by now? The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 33. Anyone else hear voices? We had been walking so long that I had kinda zoned out. So it took me a second to parse what had been said, and then even think about listening for myself. When I did, I realized they were right. I could hear someone shouting up ahead, but the words were being distorted as the sound bounced around the tunnel. That meant we were finally getting close to people and hopefully finding my 3 wayward pawns. A quick look around confirmed that everyone else was now focused and ready for whatever we were about to walk into. So once that was done, I rolled my shoulders and walked out into what turned out to be a massive auditorium of some sort. And it looked like we had finally found the missing townspeople. Whether that was a good thing or not was still up in the air. Sitting on stone bleachers, facing a massive podium where one man was giving a very impassioned speech to everyone there. Believe in me. Only through faith will you be rewarded. Only through the Lord will you be given power. And only through me will that power be brought forth. He made a grand sweeping gesture with his hands. Behold, see how the faith of our flock has grown our power. 3 glowing shapes appeared behind him, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the wings. How else was I supposed to react when someone summoned 3 angels all of a sudden? But once the glowing died down and I got a good look at the summons, I saw that besides the white wings, there wasn't much angelic about them. Each figure looked like a vaguely humanoid fusion of rock and metal with 2 big white feathered wings sticking out the back. They also remained completely still, almost like they were robots. Actually, I couldn't say that. The Dr. Wily lookalikes robot masters were pretty lifelike. Hell, even the little grunt bots shuffled and moved around. Whatever these things were more like statues than anything else. I also didn't feel anything especially holy about them, and while that wasn't proof that the summons weren't angels of some sort, I mentally marked them down as some sort of projection ability instead of a summon. Probably powered by the cult's belief in their leader, somehow considering his earlier speech. Or he could just be narcissistic. Cult leaders did have a habit of making themselves out to be crucial holy figures after all. And speaking of cult leaders, he was still talking. Time to grow our flock. This town has nurtured us greatly, but now we need to look further afield if we are going to continue to grow and gain strength. To enlighten others in the light of our Lord that all of you enjoy today. I am happy to announce that later today I will be making my first televised sermon to the country, to begin sharing our gifts with the rest of this nation. But you will still have a role to play in making our faith known to all. To do this, we need to spread our roots. Invite friends and family to our town so they can be illuminated. Call on strangers to visit and see the light, and encourage the new members of our flock to bring new members themselves. But most importantly, you must continue to believe. Believe in our mission. Believe in me and our power. And believe that I will deliver all of you to the kingdom to come. Oh, so it's a brainwashing cult. Who dares? I blinked, surprised he had heard me. Either the acoustics here were fantastic, or there was some sort of power shenanigans going on. Maybe both. Who was it, you ungrateful heathens? Answer me, or I'll just send you all back for more conditioning. Well then, the image of a charismatic cult leader sure fell apart quickly. I thought as I took a step further. Hi there. I shouted as irreverently as I could. We came looking for 3 friends of ours that came by the other day. You wouldn't happen to know where they are, would you? How did you get down here? The cult leader demanded instead. I sighed even as the auditorium broke out into a low buzz of whispers. Critical thinking didn't seem to be this one's strong suit. You left behind a ghost town with every door wide open, a church bell that rang despite that, and a secret tunnel that wasn't too hard to find because, oh right, all the doors were left wide open. Oh, he didn't like that at all. The cult leader went completely red in the face before throwing a few glances at the crowd and holding himself back from whatever he was about to start shouting. Interesting. I guess whatever brainwashing he used on everyone here wasn't complete control. It doesn't matter, he said instead as several more angels appeared behind him. You will be illuminated just like everyone here. Then you can join your friends that way. Well, I tried asking nicely. I raised a hand and prepared to blast the leader with a bolt of lightning, only for Crystal to push my hand down and step in front of me. HN? I made an inquisitive noise, because there was no real good reason for her to stop me. Let New Wave handle the master, Crystal said lowly. You focus on finding the girls and either getting the civilians out or breaking his control. We could just blast him. Quick and easy win. I countered, but she shook her head. Mom drilled us on situations like this. We don't know if taking out the master will release his victims or cause them to defend him. Until we figure out which it is, we need to stall. And our powers are better at that than yours. I disagreed, but we didn't exactly have a whole lot of time to argue with the fake angel things getting closer. Fine, you handle those things. We'll search for the girls and keep the others safe. Everyone hear that? And this whole place is now considered enemy territory. Pawns, feel free to promote if you think you need it. I got a few muttered acknowledgments, and then our group splintered as Laser Dream, Shielder, and Glory Girl went to fight the projections and the cult leader, while Carl, Gloria, and Amy split up to look for my 3 missing pawns in the crowd or the surroundings. As for me, I hung back a bit and did my best to watch over both groups for any surprises. Unless the cult leader had other powers, someone had dug that tunnel and built this room, and presumably someone else was responsible for brainwashing the townspeople. 2 more potential enemies that weren't conveniently sitting out in the open for us. So I was watching out for them, even as I watched Laser Dream and her family exchange laser beams above the crowd. Because of course the fake angel things could use lasers. They seemed pretty unconcerned about hitting the cult members below too, which forced Shielder and Laser Dream to focus their shields on protecting them instead of using them for their own defenses. Thankfully, Glory Girl was doing a good job of getting in close and breaking the projections from above, even if they were quickly replaced by the cult leader. I was getting really tempted to ignore Crystal and try to take him out. How long did she want to stall for? But she was the one that had more experience, so I was going to trust her, at least until something forced my hand. Then I was going to blast the cult leader into next week. As the fight went on, though, I was increasingly tempted to attack him anyway. Because while the New Wave kids were doing a good job of trying to keep the bystanders out of the fight, the cult leader didn't seem as worried. Several times he even aimed close to his own followers in an attempt to bait one of them into taking the hit instead, or breaking off their own attack to throw up a shield instead. Not that they were the only ones shielding the crowd. Amy had put a lot of effort into learning shield spells after her brush with death, and now she was doing her best to cover for any spots her family members missed to make it easier on them. I was also helping out as much as I could, still mostly focused on keeping an eye out for when the cult leader's powered friends would pop up, but I could still throw a decently sized shield over the area for now. And I didn't have to wait long. After Glory Girl nearly knocked the cult leader off his pedestal, forcing him to use one of his summons to catch himself and as an improvised flight pack. Then he started flying away. The others were more focused on the man himself, so I didn't blame them for not noticing. But since this would be the perfect time for a sneak attack from someone else, I had been watching the surroundings. So I saw the precise moment a perfectly square chunk of the ceiling suddenly decided to separate from the rest of the stone and fell directly on top of Glory Girl. I managed to call out so the blonde wasn't taken by surprise, but as strong as she was, she couldn't hold a multi-ton cube of rock above the now panicking cult members by herself. Laser Dream, Shielder, and Amy quickly moved to support her with their own shields. I was about to join them when Laser Dream waved me off. Go after the leader, she shouted. We can handle this, but we can't let him get away. You sure? Yes, get going. I wasted a few seconds checking they would be okay, but while the rock was slowly pressing the 4 of them down, it was a slow, controlled descent. They could easily move anyone before they got trapped underneath. So I followed her advice, spread my wings, and took off after the cult leader before he could get away. Oh! Crystal threw one last nervous glance at the hole Rias disappeared through before dragging her attention back to supporting Vicky and making sure the stone block didn't tip over unexpectedly. She couldn't help but be worried about sending her red-headed friend after an unknown master but the PRT-based training her parents had put her through had been very clear to not let them out of your sight if they didn't have control over humans. They couldn't be sure the cult leader didn't have something like that, but he at least hadn't shown it so far, and letting him slip away after he had already taken over a small town once was a bad idea. She would just have to trust Rias could handle him. Okay, your boss ran away already, so why don't you come out now? She called over the sound of the few panicking cult members that hadn't cleared out yet. The sound of slow clapping echoed out from the tunnel behind the podium the cult leader had been speaking at. A single man walked out wearing some sort of black robe thing Crystal recognized as vaguely Chinese with yellow trim along the edges and surrounding the green circle with a square hole he had on his chest. Impressive, he called back, walking forward a bit and folding his hands behind his back. How did you guess I was here? I thought that you would have assumed Sanctus was the one behind the escape route. Oh please, that guy was too busy panicking about getting knocked off his perch. Amy of all people snorted. Apparently getting turned into a devil made her snarkier side come out in public now too. He wasn't in a position to control anything. I guess that's fair. You're sharp. That's good. We'll need some smart minions now that we're expanding again. Like hell we'll join you, creep. Vicky shouted. Better yet, give up now before we break your legs and drag you to the PRT. The man sighed. So quick to violence. This is what makes you para-humans so frustrating to deal with. But fine, I can educate you on following orders after defeating you. He pulled his arms up to his hips and stomped heavily on the ground, and all the rock around him rippled and surged forward. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 34. I had to admit, if the cult leader wasn't literally just flying back towards the town, I probably would have lost him at some point. Hell, all it would have taken for him to completely slip away was to dip into the forest below, change direction a few times, and I would have no idea where to find him. Maybe it was a limitation of his powers? So far I hadn't seen him move in anything other than a straight line. So maybe the reason he hadn't tried to ditch me was because he literally couldn't. Or it could be because he felt he could deal with me one-on-one, or had something planned back in town. In the end, it didn't really matter. No matter what his plan was, mine was going to be to beat him up, force him to release the brainwashed townspeople, then go find the girls. And considering just the new wave kids were able to send him running without going all out because of his hostages, well, I didn't expect this to take long. You just jinxed us. Drake grumbled, but I just rolled my eyes at the grumpy dragon. It's one man that summons fake angel things. I thought back. Even if he can make stronger ones than what we saw earlier, I should still be able to deal with him just fine. Okay, but that means I get the next dinner pick when I say I told you so. I didn't argue and focused on making sure the cult leader didn't pull out some last-minute trick. I was confident, not stupid after all. But even as I slowly caught up to him, he did nothing but fly in a straight line over the trees. It didn't look like he was preparing anything, and nothing was summoned as far as I could tell. So unless he was doing something I simply couldn't see or sense from this far away, I was going to catch up to him right after he reached the town and hopefully before he vanished into the buildings. I'd just have to roll with it if he was. The cult leader didn't change anything up even as he reached the edges of the town. And by this point, I was certain there was a reason he was only going in a straight line without trying to summon more of his minions. So I was on the lookout for anything when I landed a little further back in from him where he was, talking to a camera. Why was a camera set up here, presumably broadcasting? And why did the leader think getting in front of it was more important than either facing me or hiding? Deciding I could just ask later, I raised a hand and shot off a lightning bolt at his back, only for his angel minion to dive in front of it as a sacrificial shield. The cult leader glanced back at me for a second, but almost immediately turned back to the camera. What was he doing? I mentally shrugged and raised my hand again. If he wanted to ignore me when I was about to blast him unconscious, then it was no skin off my nose. Another glowing red spell circle formed and shot out a bolt of lightning that hit the cult leader in the middle of the back and did nothing. He didn't even stumble as the magical electricity crackled over his form. The what? I blasted him again with similar results. Okay, if lightning wasn't working, how about a dragon shot? The blast of green energy was massively scaled back to avoid killing the man if he was simply immune to the last attack that destroyed his minion or something like that. But no, he just turned around and blocked the attack with a hand. Even if I didn't put too much effort behind that attack, he shouldn't have been able to just dismiss it like that. All right, you did something, I called out, because I needed a second to figure out what made him suddenly stick around and fight when he ran from Crystal and her family just a few minutes ago. Care to share? To my surprise, the cult leader actually replied. Pretty cordially, too. Which was weird because it was a big change from the religious/enraged ranting from earlier. Not at all, demon. I simply asked the audience to believe in me so the forces of justice could overcome evil. The belief the children across the country have in me will make it so. I paused. Belief. He'd been spouting off about that back in the tunnels too. At first I had thought it was just how he spoke, but the word choice was too deliberate even though the tone was completely flipped. So your powers work off belief then? And you just convinced a bunch of kids to back you up? Probably by hijacking a kids' network show. Kids wouldn't exactly know to not do something that's simple if they thought it was part of a show. I suppose I was less subtle than I normally like to be, but your group made me greatly accelerate my plans. He scowled a little. This was supposed to be a long-term masterstroke, not a rush job like this. I'm going to make sure you and all your little friends pay for that later. Months of planning ruined. I'd say sorry, but we both know I wouldn't mean it. I retorted. So, shall we get started? Be my guest. If energy attacks weren't working, let's see how he dealt with a fist to the jaw. Oh, there were times when Emily Piggott felt the world was conspiring against her specifically just to make her job as difficult as possible. Her perpetually understaffed department struggled daily to maintain balance in the region against a group of neo-Nazis that outnumbered their parahuman forces just by themselves, the Asian gangs ruled by a cape that deadlocked an Endbringer by himself, and a dozen other smaller groups or villains that lurked in the shadows hoping to steal any scraps they could. And while she couldn't claim to be keeping all those villains in check, she at least could pride herself with the fact the PRT wasn't losing ground despite technically being surrounded, cut off, and outnumbered. Not that her fellow directors would agree with her statement, but the sudden addition of several new and unusually powerful parahumans had thrown that carefully managed balance out the window, and governmental busybodies were clawing at her door wondering why she hadn't either arrested the new players or convinced the public that they could be handled like any of the other villains running loose. It wasn't like the rest of the country was doing much better than her division was. But because Brockton Bay had been one of the cities that was attacked by what some joker had classified as kaiju, and fared better than any others with only a few collapsed buildings instead of the disasters New York and Los Angeles turned out to be, all eyes were on her. And they weren't impressed. They didn't care that she managed to get a leash on Paladin before the ex-vigilante managed to cause a gang war, or that the protectorate had managed to stop a robot army from overrunning the local mall, or that Lung had been finally captured by Armsmaster after an apparently uncharacteristically brutal fight with the protectorate leader that left the Asian Cape suffering from necrotic injuries. No, they cared that she hadn't caught the robot maker despite him never making a public appearance, hadn't brought the Empire to heel, hadn't dragged in the cape that played a major role in not only driving off the kaiju but apparently reversing death before retreating to her home with a resurrected panacea. There was an incredible amount of political pressure to somehow raid the mansion Rias Gremory had set up on the basis that the ability to resurrect certain people should be a national asset and not determined by a teenage girl. Pressure that only increased when Paladin confirmed there were limited uses, and she had apparently blown through almost half already. Of course, that pressure didn't come with additional personnel or a way to actually breach the demonic-themed cape's protections. Hell, they weren't even sure she was in the city considering her ability to teleport. That didn't stop the other directors from demanding she siege the property anyway, just in case, they said. Never mind, it was straining her already thin resources past the breaking point. So when she was summoned to an emergency meeting with little warning, it was an understatement to say she was frustrated and more than a little stressed. Not that she could directly show it. She did take a disproportionate amount of enjoyment at seeing the normally unflappable chief director looking significantly more disheveled than Emily had ever seen her, tempered by the realization that the bigger picture must look pretty grim if Costa Brown was looking less than perfectly groomed. "Emily, good you're here," the chief director greeted once Piggott joined the conference call. "The Gremory girl, Lucifer. Tell us everything you can about her. Powers, weaknesses, points of interest. Anything that would be useful for a strike team to know before engaging." Pigott blinked at the complete disregard for the unwritten rules. Yes, the PRT wasn't above disregarding them when they could get away with it, but they were very rarely this blatant about flaunting them. If only to keep their protectorate members satisfied, they wouldn't be causally murdered in their beds for the wider organization because of a leak. I can. But why this sudden interest? When I asked for assistance dealing with Lucifer's Shaker/Trump defenses, I was told there were more pressing concerns to deal with, especially when we weathered the kaiju incident so well on our own. Christ, she doesn't know, Director Alexander Bell exclaimed and glared through his own screen, something that surprised Emily since the man was almost unfailingly polite. She began to quietly ponder what could have caused him to act like that while simultaneously checking emails to make sure she hadn't missed something. But no urgent emails other than the one summoning her to this meeting. Rebecca, this is unacceptable. How can she not? Calm down, Director Bell, the chief director demanded, raising a hand to cut the man off. We deliberately restricted certain information to reduce panic. And while Director Pigott already informed us about Lucifer's teleportation abilities, her division has no way of detecting when the girl uses them. Emily felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. God damn it. Were her men being held off by a literal empty building? Fine, Director Bell scowled. To get you up to speed, Emily, 20 minutes ago, a villain hijacked several broadcasting signals targeting kids' shows. Less than a minute after that, your devil girl shows up behind him and they start fighting. Now, we have two A-class parahumans demolishing a small Pennsylvania town on live television, and the only reason we aren't declaring the whole thing an S-class emergency is that every normal citizen seems to have vanished. A video popped up showing the unfortunately familiar redhead fighting a man in ornate robes surrounded by three almost angelic projections. Entire streets were destroyed as the two capes fought each other. One of the projections was cut in half, tanking a blow that sent the man in robes crashing through a building. Lucifer's hand shot up and there was a wave of green energy that consumed both him and the camera, only for the fight to continue from another angle with the robed man seemingly none the worse for wear. We're preparing teams to deal with both of them, but we need to be as smart as we can. Alexandria and Eidolon are still recovering from whatever fire effect the turtle kaiju hit them with, and Legend has his hands full. We're ready to call him in if we have to, but if other Protectorate members can handle these two-eyed, rather not risk the only active Triumvirate member we have. Costa Brown admitted, shifting like the decision physically pained her. Though considering how used the chief director was to ordering the Triumvirate around, the loss of such a convenient option might actually pain her. God knew Emily would have loved to drop one of the country's strongest capes on her own problems once in a while. Emily, if you could? Fine. Good luck bringing Lucifer down, though. She's not showing off half her tricks there, and oh hell. All eyes snapped to the broadcast video as the Grimory girl had finally managed to put the robed cape on the ground for a few solid seconds. But instead of staying down, the newer cape began to glow silver and started to grow. And grow. And grow. Once the light faded, Emily could only stare in disbelief at the massive statuesque figure the man had transformed into. A 30-foot masculine figure with feathery embellishments on its head, neck, shoulders, wrists, calves, and midriff that unfortunately reminded her of the Simurgh, and a large broken halo that hovered behind its back. Damn it, I did not need this today. Director Costa Brown muttered before barking orders. Cancel the strike teams for now. I want all of you watching in case we just saw the birth of a new Endbringer or something, but unless it looks like Lucifer can't handle things, we are going to hang back and collect as much information as possible. They're broadcasting their capabilities. We'll take full advantage of that. Directors, put your teams on standby. I'm not going to sound the Endbringer alerts immediately, but we definitely might need a rapid response team if this turns out to be a new one. And someone get wedged on this video right now. Emily Pigott very carefully did not smirk at the chief director's frustration. It was understandable considering the situation, but she did allow herself a healthy dose of schadenfreude. Maybe the world did conspire against her. But at least for today, some of the others that sat on the sidelines and gave nothing but unwanted, unhelpful advice were dealing with the same headache she was. And if she was lucky, the Grimory situation might even resolve itself. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 35. Well, that was unexpected. I muttered as I looked up at the now towering form of the cult leader. I wasn't exactly sure how belief powers made him go from summoning minions to powering up to the point he could fist fight me to turning into a giant animated statue, but it certainly put me in a bit of a bind if I didn't want to start throwing around attacks that would level the town. But on the other hand, would anything less even do anything? The boosted gear appeared on my arm, and I started powering up. And not a second too soon, because the statue pointed one giant hand at me where a ball of light was gathering, and every instinct I had screamed at me to move. There was a flash of light and heat, and suddenly I didn't have to worry about wrecking the town. Not with a giant trench burned through half of it. I recommend you don't get hit by that. Thanks, Drake. I never would have guessed that. I snarked mentally. Any ideas on how to beat him? Do the same thing you did against that dinosaur thing, Drake suggested. Hit him hard until he gives up. So don't get hit, and hit him hard. You're a certified master strategist. I sighed as I charged up a dragon shot. Then again, I did ask the dragon, so I guess that's on me. I never needed anything else, Drake said somewhat defensively. Fair enough, I replied. This would be a lot easier if I could use Balance Breaker. You're close. You just need a trigger. My partner reassured me. Not that it made my situation any better. I just hoped the rest of my peerage was having a better time than I was. Oh. Laserdream bit back a curse as she flew back behind one of her brother's shields as another barrage of rocks launched through the air at her. She quickly responded by shooting an energy blast at the geokinetic, but it was stopped when he stomped on the ground and a section of the floor turned into a wall. Stay still already. Glory Girl dropped on the robed man from above, but unfortunately, just like the last time she tried getting the drop on him, it seemed like he had eyes in the back of his head. The ground sort of shifted around so that the villain was moved out of the way. Laserdream's cousin crashed into the floor, missing him entirely, and was quickly pinned as two more slabs of stone rose up out of the ground and smashed together. The villain shouted and made a punching motion which sent the entire block of stone shooting off into the distance, and she could only hope Vicky was still okay. She shot another blast at their opponent, this time followed by Shielder and even Amy adding their own attacks. A tiny voice in the back of Laserdream's head was gibbering about how weird it was to have Amy joining in on a fight and wondering what her new cape name was going to be. The rest of her mind was screaming to focus on the fight as the robed cape blocked all three attacks by forming a dome of earth over himself and then punch-ejecting sections off as projectiles. This struggle is only a waste of time and energy. You cannot defeat Sanctus, so all this amounts to is a refusal to submit to the inevitable. You will be defeated, and you will become agents of my daily where I, Long Fong, will direct you to bring order to this chaotic world. You know, it doesn't surprise me he's in a cult, Shielder muttered while Amy made her disagreement a little louder. Not going to happen, Slimeball. Rias is going to kick your boss's ass and tear this whole place to the ground. There was a rumbling sound as, much to Laserdream's relief, an uninjured Glory Girl flew out of the rubble to rejoin them in the air. Though judging from the angry scowl on her face, her cousin didn't exactly enjoy the experience. Is that why you resist? Your belief that the red-headed girl will be victorious? Well then, let me show you just how mistaken you are. Long Fong pulled a small remote from a hidden pocket and pressed a button where two things happened. The first was a hidden projector turning on and a video beginning to play on a mostly undamaged wall. But the second thing was Long Fong wincing as though someone had just shouted in his ear. Laserdream glanced at her family members to see if anyone else caught that. Amy and Shielder didn't seem to, distracted by the sudden projection, but Glory Girl caught her eye and nodded. It looked like they figured out how the villain seemed to know where they were attacking from without looking sometimes. Long Fong had backup somewhere talking to him either through a power or an earpiece. Backup that wasn't very happy with him, and after Laserdream looked at the video she could see why. A massive Simmergesque figure was fighting Rias in what little remained of the town they had come from. Massive beams of light that made Laserdream's own blasts look like a matchstick next to a bonfire erased entire buildings as it fought her red-headed friend. The issue? At least from a deranged cult's perspective, it was losing. There was no sound on the video, but she had no trouble imagining the ear-splitting boom as Rias smashed into the giant statue thing's head, causing a spider web of cracks to form all over and even over a third of one of the horns to break free. The statue staggered and another bright green energy blast caught it in the knee, ripping the giant's leg out from under it and causing it to land on a building. Rias isn't holding back, huh? Vicky noted. Impossible. The savior form is Sanctus trump card. A single parahuman can't possibly stand up to it. Honestly? Laserdream agreed with him. She didn't think any cape besides Triumvirate Tier 1s could handle Rias once she started to escalate. Back home, only Lung really had a chance of taking her one-on-one, and he had fought Leviathan to a standstill. But then again, Rias and her group weren't parahumans, were they? The broadcast should have given him enough power to swat an Endbringer like a fly. How could interrupted? What do you mean the broadcast was interrupted? You said it would reach Europe before anyone even had a clue what was happening. That was as good as confirmation Long Fong was working with someone else running things elsewhere. There was a crackle of static from the few speakers in the room that hadn't been broken in the fight, and Laserdream was instantly on guard. Was this part of an attack? Some sort of sound-based power? Ah, hello? Testing 1, 2, 3? Is this thing on? A familiar voice that made Laserdream straighten up said, "That was Alex. Hi there. Just wanted to let you know that we found that fancy broadcasting machine Mr. Emmerich showed us earlier. And, we might have broken it a bit trying to swap out the video feed. Don't worry, we figured it out in the end. We even managed to upload a new one before we broke the whole thing. And don't worry, we're bringing everything back, so you can fix it if you want." Laserdream very clearly heard Clover in the distance yelling, "Knock, knock," and the faint sound of an explosion. Going by the sudden wince from Long Fong as he clutched at his ear from the sudden loud noise, Rias's 3 missing pawns had just invaded wherever his tech support was and hopefully captured them, which meant all they needed to do was beat this guy and head back and help take down their leader. "Looks like you're on your own, Big Tooth," Glory Girl called out as she charged again, on the same page as Laserdream. "Let's see how well you do without someone watching your back." The villains sneered at them, and then the area was once again filled with flying rocks and energy beams. "Oh." I frowned as the giant crashed through another building, kicking up a good amount of dust in the process. This isn't working. I'd lost track of how many times I'd hit the damn thing. But no matter what I did, it still got up no worse for wear. Unlike the town, which was now pretty much a wasteland after all the fighting. "You are doing damage, but it's simply healing too fast," Drake noted as we watched the latest impact crater fix itself. Even the horn I had snapped off was almost back to normal by now. But I haven't seen a twitch of pain yet. Hope you have a point behind that, partner, 'cause I'm almost tapped out at this point. I flapped my wings as another beam of light shot through the space I had just been occupying, only to run headfirst into a smaller, weaker beam that had been shot half a second later. I barely managed to throw up a shield to tank most of the damage, but that was another hit to my magic and stamina. At this rate, the statue was going to win just because of attrition. I fought all kinds of things. The only ones that didn't react to pain were either automatons or constructs. We know this isn't an automaton, so there is probably a core creating the rest of the body somewhere. Drake, I've hit the damn thing everywhere. If there was a core, don't you think I would have gotten it by now? You just didn't hit deep enough. It took me a second to figure out what he meant. Penetrate, one of Drake's abilities developed over the many years he and Albion spent trying to defeat each other that let him bypass any defense other than the target's inherent durability. Which meant if I could find and hit the core, it didn't matter how much stuff was in the way. The problem was Penetrate wasn't something I could use multiple times in a row. Not yet anyway. I'm only going to have one shot. MN, it's likely either the gem on the head or the chest. Make it count. I had thought the same thing. It was a risk assuming the cult leader's powers worked anything like mine, but the gems that would appear on my balance breaker both stored and helped emit my power. One of them being the core would make sense. While I flew around the giant to avoid getting blasted again, I mentally went over the fight before deciding to target the gem on the chest. It made more sense for the core to be somewhere central, where the entire construct wouldn't be rendered helpless if its neck somehow broke off. Of course, I could be completely wrong. Let's not think about that. All right, let's give it everything we got. Explosion. New strength surged through my body as my stored-up boosts were released. As tired as I was, I would only have a few moments to land a hit. Good thing it was a big target. The air screamed as I flew forward. dodging a few more beams and ducking under a giant marble arm that tried to swat me out of the air. But something that big wasn't fast enough now that I was going all out. Before the statue could make a second attempt, I was in front of the giant blue crystal, fist drawn back and a sphere of green aura in front of me. Dragon shot, penetrate. I punched the sphere and smiled when the resulting beam not only engulfed the gem, but tore the whole thing from the rest of the body. The giant gave one final jerk as the power allowing it to move gave out, and it collapsed to its knees. Just in time, too, as Drake announced a reset, and my entire body suddenly felt like it had the strength and integrity of incredibly overcooked pasta. But I couldn't stop just yet. Had to make sure I took the cult leader out so he didn't slip away and start this whole mess up again somewhere else. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 36. I sat down on one of the less destroyed patches of pavement, wings vanishing into my back now that I no longer needed them, and wobbled uncertainly as my knees threatened to give out. As much as I liked the perks the boosted gear gave me, the drawbacks could sometimes be a pain in the ass. I don't think I was ever going to get used to the feeling after using Explosion, but I was getting better at pushing through it. After a slightly uncertain start, I calmly walked over to the hunched-over form of the cult leader. The gem that he had been hiding in had vanished and left him struggling to rise from his hands and knees. As I got closer, I could hear him muttering something to himself over and over, but I wasn't really interested in listening. I had friends I needed to check in on and make sure they were safe. So, I think I won that round. You want to call it here, or go best 2 out of 3? I asked casually. Can't I feel it? Why 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 can't I? He kept muttering in an unbroken loop, barely pausing to breathe. Hello? Against my better judgment, I reached out and touched him on the shoulder. I actually flinched back when his head snapped to me so fast I was surprised it didn't crack. You did something to me. He raged and threw a hand up at me. Cut me off from my believers somehow. Give it back. Give me my power back. I flinched back, expecting an attack, but nothing came. Instead, the cult leader just slumped further forward as if just a little shouting winded him. That was weird. Sorry to say, but all I did was blast you out of the giant statue. If you're having power impotency, it's not because of something I did. Liar. I was about to become a god, fed by the belief of people all over the country. And then that belief was cut off. You had to have done something. I shrugged but didn't fight him on that. If he wanted to believe that I sealed off his powers, somehow I wasn't going to try and change his mind. And hey, since his powers worked off belief, maybe him believing I took them was why he couldn't use them. I doubted it, but still wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Well, either way, it looks like your whole brainwashing scheme is a bust. And if you're out of juice, then I'm just going to tie you up in. I paused as there was a sharp crack nearby, and 5 people in brightly colored costumes appeared out of nowhere. It made sense that the protectorate would respond to a fight that practically leveled an entire town. I was just surprised it took so long and that they only sent. There was another crack as one of the capes vanished. 4 people to investigate. Let them deal with you, I guess. I finished, turning and giving the newcomers a wave. Hi there. Little late to the party, don't you think? The 4 capes had been checking out the destroyed scenery and flinched at my voice. One of them started floating, and another raised a now glowing hand at me. I tensed, waiting for an attack, but the sharp crack of their teleporter, reappearing with another group of 4, had him flinch and turn towards them before he settled down. Anyway, fight's over. This guy was responsible. Feel free to take him in. I've got stuff to check in on. I continued even as more capes started to filter in one way or another. Hold it. One of the capes shouted as I turned to walk away. You're Lucifer, right? We heard about you in the briefing. Do you really think you can just leave after destroying a town? After killing God knows how many people? My eye twitched at the G word. It thankfully didn't come up often, usually only when I slipped up and said it myself. But every so often someone mentioning the big guy upstairs would give me a twinge of something ranging from an uncomfortable itch to a headache. And only me for some reason. The rest of my peerage seemed fine no matter what, which was completely unfair. After a bit of time, I guessed it was based on their personal faith, since some people didn't give me a feeling at all, and this guy was a true believer. Capital letters intended. No idea if that made him an asshole or not, though. Being devoted to a particular religion didn't mean you were a good person after all. I looked closer at him and took notice of the stylized cross emblem on his shoulder. Haven, basically a Christian superhero team that operated further down south. I didn't really know much more about them than that, though. They weren't really a presence where I lived. Yeah, that's me, and don't worry, no one died here. I replied and pointed at the still kneeling cult leader. This guy and his cult brainwashed them all and had them go to a facility a few miles from here. My group is dealing with those right now, and I kinda need to get back to them. A cult? Brainwashed? Hold on. You can't just leave yet. You have to answer for what happened here. His shouting got the attention of the other capes, and we were being slowly surrounded, though most of them looked uncertain about what exactly they were supposed to be doing. Look, I'd love to stand here and play 20 questions with all of you, I said, flaring my wings again. But my friends are still fighting, and unless you can keep up, I've got to get going. And then I was off, flying back the way I originally came. I heard some shouts behind me and kept glancing back every so often to make sure I wasn't about to get hit from behind, but it seemed that the disaster response group that showed up wasn't all that eager to chase after me. I saw a few flyers rise up, only to get shouted down by their friends a few seconds later. I mentally shrugged. If they wanted to play it safe, that just made it easier for me to grab everyone and leave once the fighting was over. They would have to follow eventually, and we could leave the brainwashed cult members to them. Oh. As I got closer to the cult facility, I wasn't surprised that I couldn't hear the sounds of fighting anymore. Fights rarely lasted longer than a few minutes, and just flying between the town and the facility easily took around 5 minutes one way. Combined with however long my fight with the leader took Crystal, and the others were probably done fighting long before I was. I just hoped that I was coming back to them all being okay. I trusted all of them, and most of them were strong or experienced enough to handle any surprises. But it only took one bad hit. So when I flew back through the hole in the ceiling, I was definitely happy to see Laserdream and Shielder guarding the unconscious body of what I assumed was one of the cult members in on the actual plan because he was wearing. Was that a daily uniform? Huh. I hadn't expected to run into two reincarnators here. I'd assumed that most of them would stay independent from each other if they were seriously trying to win that contest. But I guess some were like me and either didn't care about it or were willing to team up at least for a little while. Rias. Hey guys. I raised a hand in greeting and let it fall back to my side after a half-assed wave. Everything settled here? If you count trying to keep a whole town's worth of civilians from panicking after they learned their whole religion thing was a lie, then yeah, totally settled. Shielder grumbled. We've had to keep this guy separated from them just so they wouldn't attack him. Huh. Sam, Alex, and Clover got a video of Sanctus, Long Fong, and their computer guy talking about how they were going to hack the TV networks and power up Sanctus and attract people to the cult, then use Long Fong's brainwashing technique on certain people to either grow the cult further or give them more resources. Crystal explained. They uploaded it to the same broadcast the cult used so everyone saw it. I guess with enough evidence the whole thing was faked, just to give them more power broke through the brainwashing. They're kinda pissed. I guess Sanctus was the name of the cult leader? It was good to finally know what to call him. But the girls are okay? I asked, focusing on the important part. Yeah, they're helping Vicky and Ames herd the cult members. Not really sure how long they can keep them all calm, or what to do with them later. We saw that you pretty much trashed their home, and that was before the cameras were all destroyed. It was pretty badass though. Shielder added. You totally wrecked him. I winced at that. Being known as the person that leveled a town was almost never a good thing. Well, the good news is that the protectorate started sending in some responders, I said, determined to ignore that particular issue for now. I told them how to find this place, so they'll show up eventually. Great. We can hand off things to them. Rias, you're back. Did you win? A cheerful voice practically shouted, and I found myself suddenly wearing two of my missing pawns as a necklace as I was tackled from behind, and only stopped from falling over when the third joined in the surprise group hug. Clover. I half-heartedly protested. Alex, Sam. I'm glad you're okay. You had us worried. And yeah, I won. Was there ever any doubt? We saw you fighting a guy that turned into an Endbringer, my sarcastic bishop said as she followed after the three girls currently hanging off of me, trailed by the rest of our group. Even with all the bullshit you do, We'd be stupid to not worry about that. Seeing everyone safe and sound made the last bit of tension I was feeling relax, and my little group hug went from trying to crush me to holding me up as my legs gave out. I'm fine, I'm fine, I assured everyone as they freaked out about my little collapse. Just pushed myself a little too long. Not used to it. I'll be all right after a little rest. You sure? Gloria asked. 'Cause we can go get help. Some protectorate movers just showed up from the tunnel going back to the toe, what used to be the town. We came back to tell Laserdream and Shielder we could hand over Big Tooth to them and go looking for you. Big Tooth? That's what Vicky said his name was. I looked at the younger girl and raised an eyebrow. No, seriously, that's his name. Well, Long Fong, technically, but that's what he said. It's probably Chinese. It roughly translates to square or four-sided dragon. I corrected absently. Right. Well, if the protectorate is here already, then are we ready to head home? Because I really want to sleep in my own bed after this. Oh wait, what about our stuff? We didn't get to pack up because we snuck into the cult. We grabbed it for you. We're good to go. Then yeah, I'm ready to head back home. I can't wait to tell you all the full story about how we snuck in. It was like we were super spies. I smiled at the enthusiasm even as the bright red emblem for the teleportation spell spread out beneath us all. I can't wait to hear it. One flash later, and we were all back in the main lobby of the mansion. Oh. Then we grabbed some disguises and followed after them. Clover said as she enthusiastically went over the spy trio's adventure, all of us heading towards the kitchen for a quick meal before we fully relaxed. And then, hold on. I cut her off with a raised hand. The kitchen lights were on, and Sam made us go through a checklist before we left to make sure nothing was left on while we were away. But the wards were still up. I could feel them. So how did someone get in? Actually, it would be pretty easy. All it would take is knowing where to go and not having a desire to attack the people supposed to be here. I wasn't all that great with wards yet. I gave everyone a quick glance to confirm they knew something was wrong and then turned back to the lit doorway. There was no way whoever was inside hadn't heard us, so there was no point trying to sneak around now. I summoned the boosted gear and prepared to react to anything that might come my way before stepping through, to reveal a tired-looking little girl sitting at the island with the remains of a PB&J sandwich in front of her looking back at me. Huh. The numbers said you wouldn't be back until tomorrow? Well, fuck. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 37. I took a bite of my sandwich, frowned, and forced myself to swallow. Grape jelly was really the worst of all options. I'd have preferred strawberry, but someone had eaten all my other jars while my group had been in the mountains. If you don't like it, you could always make something different, Alex pointed out while happily eating her own abomination. Peanut butter and pickles were not a valid combination, no matter what she said. I would've, but we ran out of sliced ham after Carl's sandwich and Amy's been hogging the marshmallow fluff, said Grumpy Bishop, actually grabbed the jar of spreadable sugar and hugged it defensively. Amy had a massive sweet tooth, who would have guessed? And anything else requires actual cooking, which I don't want to do right now. Does this mean? I made a shushing gesture at the child intruder without looking at her. I still wasn't dealing with her just yet. How mature of you. Shut it. Besides, grape isn't bad. It's just objectively worse than all the others. Clover slammed her hands on the counter and jumped to her feet. You take that back. Grape is at least top 3. Raspberry, strawberry, apple. I countered immediately. Top 5 then. Blackberry and cherry. Blackberry and raspberry are practically the same thing. I smirked in victory when Gloria and Vicky looked at my pawn in outrage. It turned out both of them loved raspberries, and the thought of them being considered the same as blackberries was enough to kickstart a 5-way argument as Clover tried to defend herself while Eric and Crystal teamed up to join in with their own opinions. Leaving that to simmer in the background, I turned back to Alex. So yeah, the sandwich is fine. But it's literally fine. I'll eat it, but I won't be happy with it. Couldn't you just teleport to a grocery store? Carl deadpanned. Yeah, but I don't want to. Everyone not distracted by the blackberry argument laughed at that while Carl just grumbled something as he stuffed the rest of his sandwich in his mouth and said he was heading to his workshop, which really meant he was heading to the unused garage he was slowly filling with the stuff he needed for his tinkering. That kicked off several members of our group, heading out to do their own thing after asking if I needed them to hang around. I didn't, at least not yet. So all my pawns took off to unpack and settle in after our trip. All the new wave kids decided to stick around though. I had my fun, and I couldn't keep putting off dealing with the intruder forever. So with a sigh I turned and faced the 12-year-old that broke into my house. All right, I've put this off long enough. What's your deal? Oh, does this mean you'll hear me out? The preteen asked. I raised an eyebrow at her. Did you think I would kick you out when you went through the effort of breaking into the house of a known villain? One the PRT had presumably been trying and failing to do the same for over a week, without finding out why. I guess not, she murmured weakly. Well, now I just felt bad. Okay, let's start over. My name is Rias Gremory. Why did you break into my house? My name is Dina, Dina Alcott. And the numbers said I would be safe if I stayed here. She answered, which had all the heroes perk up. Numbers? Safe from what? Vicky and Crystal asked at the same time. When I ask certain questions, I can see the future. I also get a number in a percent about how likely something is to happen. Dina explained. We were going over how sometimes parahumans get forced into gangs or kidnapped in school, and I asked how likely that was going to happen to me. She started tearing up. It was around 30% then, and every time I asked it just kept getting higher. Did you tell anyone about that? Your parents or the PRT? Vicky asked, softly placing a hand in front of the girl, close enough to reassure her, but not actually touching and making her feel trapped. Dina didn't grab it, but she did calm down a bit. I tried telling my parents, but they wouldn't listen, even when the headaches got really bad. I wanted to call the PRT or my uncle, but the numbers got really bad when I asked, so I didn't do that. I don't know why, though. Vicky frowned. Why would it matter if you called your uncle? He's the mayor. Wah. Really? I do. Don't worry about it for now. Just keep going. I said regarding Dina's previous statement, which got a few reactions. Vicky in particular looked like she wanted to grill me immediately, but Crystal gave her a look that said leave it for later. Then she gave me one that promised pain if I didn't explain later. All right. I kept trying to stop it, but no matter what, the numbers for someone trying to kidnap me went up every day. But then I overheard someone at school saying the heroes were still trying to get into your house after you did something to Panacea, and I asked if I would be safe here. She ducked her head. It was 83.592% likely I'd be safe. Only 80% even with Rias's bullshit magic defenses? Then again, a kid broke in, so I guess they aren't that great. Amy chimed in. Dina ducked her head. Sorry. Don't worry about it. I know they're kinda bad right now, I assured her. Still, 80% was pretty low for literal magic wards when only one other person outside our group knew magic existed. Of course, that person was Paladin, which meant he no doubt spread it throughout the protectorate and PRT, which meant any moles the gangs had in the local office would know too. So in short, everyone knew. Fuck. In that case, 80% was actually really damn good in the short term, but would only get worse as people started to start trying things just to see if they worked. Oh well, I already knew I needed to make better defenses anyway. So were you just hiding out in Rias's house alone for a few days? Eric asked. That must have been boring. Kinda, but I just watched TV and browsed PHO. You brought a computer? No. Someone left the password on a sticky note next to the monitor. I didn't touch anything else but... I narrowed my eyes and glared towards the door Gloria had left through. She was the only one that would leave stuff like that lying around. That's okay, Vicky assured her. And not to change the subject, but does anyone know you're here? Your family? Or maybe a friend? Dina shook her head no. Do you want to? 76.82, 3% chance something bad happens to my parents if I call them now. Dina said, tearing up again. Okay, then we'll hold off on that for a bit. I said, I assume you picked out a room while you were here? No, I was just staying on the couch. Then let's get you set up, and we'll think of what to do later. If you need anything we don't have here, I can teleport somewhere and grab it. Okay. Everyone made to leave, but Crystal held me back by my arm. Don't think you wormed out of explaining why going to the PRT was a bad idea? She whispered. We're going to have a talk about that later. Ah, damn it. I'd hoped she'd forget. Oh, and you're sure of this? Director Pigott demanded into the phone. The rest of the room couldn't hear the answer, but going by the expression on the corpulent woman's face, whatever was being said wasn't making her happy. Looks like the bean counters aren't going to sign off on the pizza party. Assault joked quietly, trying to lighten the mood and at least getting a small smirk from Battery. The rest of the gathered protectorate had smaller reactions. Velocity just rolling his eyes while Arms Master and his second-in-command, Miss Militia, remained professionally stoic. None of them were having a particularly good week. Not after they were getting eviscerated online for failing to really contribute during the Godzilla incident and the resulting disappearance of Panacea. Though thankfully the exact reason she had been taken away hadn't leaked. The last thing they needed were people flooding the city, trying to get a shot at a way to come back from the dead. But the netizens were less than impressed with the fact the Protectorate had so far failed to retrieve Panacea after the fact. Something that would only get worse if they found out Lucifer and the group she had accumulated weren't even in the building for who knows how long. Many of them were even calling for Pigott to step down for it. You think they'll finally send us some backup? Assault asked a bit more seriously. Doubt it. Velocity muttered. Never got anything when we only had one giant lizard running around. And the higher-ups have Paladin's report. Panacea is probably perfectly fine. They just care about getting to Grimory before anyone else does. As long as we're keeping her locked in her house, they don't care if we can't get inside as long as no one else can. You shouldn't be using her real name. Miss Militia scolded, but the speedster just shrugged. Don't think it really matters at this point. The internet had blown Lucifer's identity wide open after the Godzilla incident. And once the genie was out, there was no going back in the bottle. Hopefully the redhead didn't mind too much. She didn't seem to care about her identity that much from previous interactions, but you could never really know how a person would take being unmasked. The real issue is we aren't keeping her locked in her house, though. Battery added. The troopers were saying she was spotted in another town a few hours ago, and we know she can teleport. Anyone know anything about that? There were a few headshakes. All of them were busy enough with local issues that they couldn't investigate a random rumor that had nothing to do with the city. Though the fact Arms Master remained silent was a surprise to all of them. Normally he was the first to look into new issues that popped up. The tensing on his jaw said that he did know something too, just that he wasn't interested in volunteering information at the moment. Hey, boss man, you hear any? Assault's question was interrupted by Director Pigott slamming the phone down on the cradle. Bastards, she spat, glaring down at the device before shifting that glare to the gathered heroes. Something wrong, Director? Miss Militia asked diplomatically. The Director took a breath, but it did little to calm her down. Lucifer and the Peerage have just been given a pending S-Class rating by the main office after the girl demolished a small town on national television. The only reason it's not active is because the fight was due to a para-human cult that had taken over the town and was in the process of looking to expand. Everyone save Arms Master was visibly stunned by the news. The fact the leader of the local protectorate simply crossed his arms and clenched his hands so hard they could hear the servos in his power armor told them he already knew about some of this. How the F? Assault cut off as Battery nudged him in the ribs. S-Class? S-Class ratings were reserved for threats that were considered natural disasters rather than individuals. Even Lung, leader of the ABB and someone who had fought and defeated the entire protectorate roster at the time, by himself only had an A rank, pending. Which means as long as she's content to keep playing house with her friends, we will not be receiving reinforcements to deal with her. Pigott snarled. Apparently there isn't. She was interrupted as Triumph, the youngest member to join the Protectorate before Paladin burst through the door. There better be a good reason for interrupting this meeting. The director warned the lion-themed cape. Sorry, ma'am, but we just got an alert about Dina. Triumph rushed out. And while I understand you're worried about your cousin and hope to goodness she turns up safe, Director Pigott said in a deliberate voice, I fail to see why that is my problem. Especially when I'm trying to keep the city standing while half my forces are tied up trying to break into a fortified mansion or spreading themselves thin on patrols with very little rest and no backup. So please, explain to me why this alert of yours is important enough to interrupt my meeting. Triumph visibly swallowed after being on the receiving end of his superior's anger, but steeled himself anyway. Some of the neighbors around the Grimory mansion allowed our agents access to their security cameras. One of them caught Dina heading towards the building a few days ago, and she never left. There was a stunned silence in the room as everyone contemplated the fact the mayor's niece had gone missing on the property of an S-class threat they'd been unable to access for several days, which meant she was either a parahuman that had an ability that let her get through the defenses, was smart or lucky enough to find a gap even their best couldn't, or had been deliberately invited inside. Well, fuck. Assault summed the situation up. Battery didn't even attempt to admonish him. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 38. All right, spill. Crystal demanded once Dina was situated in one of the unused rooms. I'd need to get more sheets since that used the last of the spares, but it was better than keeping her on the couch. Stupid thing was too firm to sleep on comfortably. Dina probably agreed with me, because she was out like a light barely a minute after lying down on a proper mattress. I sighed because I already knew this was going to be a pain. Still, let's see what I could get away with. Okay, you know how you and the girls think someone sent me to Earthbet? And how Paladin thinks he knows me? It's because my mouth snapped shut as it triggered the Hayas, preventing me from talking about how I got here or the game in general activated. Paladin thinks it's because he saw someone that looked like me somewhere and assumed I was the same person while I saw someone with similar abilities. I rephrased my statement. The Hayas couldn't stop me from saying other people's opinions after all, especially if I didn't include information it was specifically trying to censor. Crystal knew about that, and while she looked annoyed that I was going to have to be vague about things she would understand because I wasn't doing it just to mess with her, she huffed and started putting the puzzle pieces I gave her together. Okay, so Paladin thinks he knows you, but you know other people can have the same or at least similar powers, and that somehow matters with you being sent to another Earth and how you know about Dina. I smiled at her to show she was going in the right direction. So, wherever you saw those images you saw someone similar to Dina, and why she can't ask for help, I guess. Is it some downside to her power that things turn out bad if she goes to someone to handle her problems for her? So close, only to miss at the last second. Still, me knowing about a power was more reasonable than assuming I knew Dina specifically by watching her from another dimension. Even if Professor Haywire had definitively proven to Earthbet that alternate realities existed by blowing open a hole to another Earth, most people still didn't jump to the conclusion that a story they read was real somewhere. Even fewer would theorize they were the ones that existed only in a story somewhere. People were self-centered that way. Not quite. It's my throat locked up again. Okay, can't give specifics about Dina's situation. Is it because the plot of Worm was getting in the way, that the only reason I knew about this was meta-knowledge or a restriction by the game? I'd have to experiment later. As the niece of the mayor, a lot of people probably want to use her to influence her uncle somehow. I changed tracks by saying a very generic, but true, line. Some of those people are likely criminals. Crystal furrowed her eyebrows, thinking hard. Okay, so it's not that you know her power, but you know someone looking to use her? But how? No, that's not important right now. There's a person or group of people after Dina and they do bad things if she goes to her family or the PRT. Wait, she also said she came here because someone was going to kidnap her for her power. Are you saying someone willing to sell Dina out to the gangs for her power works for the mayor and the PRT? Damn it, just a little off once again. I couldn't say. I said automatically. Shit, tripped the Hayas. About the gangs or the informant? I couldn't say. Thankfully, Crystal stopped before I got locked down again, but it pretty much put a hold on giving her new information. She got the gist of it though. Someone knew Dina had powers and wanted to take advantage of her, and would step in if she went to people for help, and that I knew something about it. I wasn't sure what she intended to do with that information, but I was satisfied that she would handle it her own way, especially now that she knew I couldn't say much more about the subject if I wanted to. She was the hero here after all. All right, topic change then. What are you going to do now? Crystal asked. The PRT are still outside, and I assume trying to get in somehow. Just going to keep ignoring them, really? I shrugged. I doubt they can really keep this up once the gangs make a big move somewhere. Until then, everyone can just fly or teleport out. And speaking of going out, I'm probably going to need to run to the store since a certain uninvited guest ate through a bunch of my staples. Seriously? With everything going on, you were just going to go shopping? I shrugged again. Yeah, kinda. It's not like the PRT can really stop me from going where I want. And while I have the most transparent secret identity on the East Coast, I can still take advantage of it since I haven't done anything criminal as a civilian that anyone could prove. Oh, that reminds me. Are the rest of New Wave hanging around for a while? I need to plan how much stuff to get. Crystal looked at me with an expression that said she wanted to shake me for being so cavalier about this, but took a deep breath and sighed instead. Give me a minute. I'll ask what everyone wants to do. Oh, what most of the group wanted to do, it turned out, was to just stay at home and relax or do their own thing for the day. For the most part, Carl was content to keep tinkering in the garage. Sam, Alex, and Clover decided to stay in the house. And most of the New Wave kids were currently caught up screaming at their parents over the phone. Apparently, a week apart wasn't enough for both sides to calmly talk things out, and things quickly got heated. I wasn't staying around to find out how that was going to go, and it seemed Amy agreed with me since she decided she was coming with me. Theoretically a dangerous move, but between flight and teleportation, it was much less risky than most would assume. Plus, I wasn't about to lock Amy up. If she wanted to head out for something as normal as grocery shopping, I wasn't going to say no. Not when I was taking Gloria with me, too. Dina would be staying in the house for obvious reasons. She might have walked through the wards, but they had still done their job keeping everyone else out. And the house didn't suddenly get less safe with actual people inside it again. So with that settled, Amy and Gloria joined me on the teleportation circle in the main lobby, and with a flex of magic, we were whisked off into the city. Oh, don't you think that's too many tomatoes? Gloria asked as I loaded another container into our cart. I gave her a half shrug while mentally going through the recipe I had in mind to see what we still needed. Not really. They cooked down a lot, and there's a bunch of us. If anything, we might need to make another run to get more. Shouldn't you just get bigger ones then? Nope. You have to use either cherry or grape tomatoes, or it won't work right. And since I have the option, I'm going with cherry. Gloria raised an eyebrow at me. Do you actually have something against the word grape, or something? You do know for tomatoes it's just the name? I smirked at her. Grape tomatoes were honestly fine, but it was kind of funny that the breakfast conversation from earlier popped up again. What are you even trying to make? Amy asked, returning with the garlic cloves I asked for. Gnocchi in a burst tomato sauce. Sounds complicated. Practically the opposite. I laughed. One of the reasons I loved the recipe was because it was like 6 ingredients at its core and was absolutely delicious. It stored and reheated pretty well too, if you say so. Anyway, what else do we need? I looked in the cart and counted off everything we had picked up. Some staples like bread, milk, eggs, and soda. Replacement jelly for the jars Dina had emptied. A bunch of ground meats for whatever we decided to make later. Some dried pasta for days where we didn't feel like putting effort into cooking. And enough snacks that it looked like we were going to throw a party for 100 people. What were we missing? Still need the cheese. Drake pointed out. I thanked him for the reminder and wandered over to the deli section, snagging a few packets of prosciutto on the way. It would make this trip a bit pricier than I planned for, but one of my favorite lazy meals were just throwing meat, cheese, and crackers on a plate and calling it a charcuterie board. It let me pretend to be fancy while really just having a more adult version of a Lunchable. My good mood did take a bit of a dip as I moved through the aisles without finding the type I needed, but mozzarella worked as a substitute. It was weird, but it never seemed like I could find a store with burrata actually in stock. Oh well, couldn't be helped. Or at least, not without more effort than I was willing to spend. But with my desire for handfuls of meat and creamy things satisfied, I made my way back to the other two and made some last-minute checks for anything we might have forgotten. Though at this point it was starting to be less about what we might have forgotten for meals and more about what snacks we saw on the shelves we might want to indulge in later. After Amy spent a good few minutes trying to balance a party-sized pack of cookies on the mountain of food, practically spilling out of the cart before just giving up and holding on to it, I decided that we had gotten enough for one trip and headed towards the checkout lanes. So Rias, you never really explained what you wanted to make, Gloria said, mostly to fill the silence while we were waiting for our turn. How not complicated is this? It's super simple, I replied and started counting off the steps. You basically take a bit of oil and fry some grated garlic for a bit. Then you add the tomatoes until they cook down into a kind of jammy sauce. Add in some red pepper and heavy cream, and you have a really good base you can adjust in a few ways. Throw in some pre-cooked gnocchi and cheese that you let simmer for a bit and bam! One really easy Italian dish that isn't just spaghetti and meatballs. Huh, that does sound pretty good. Are you big on cooking? Kinda. I wiggled a hand back and forth. I have a few things I know how to make pretty well, but at the same time I could live off of frozen chicken nuggets for a week straight if I wanted. My interest in it comes and goes. Maybe we should set up a cooking schedule. It would be kinda neat to see if anyone else knows stuff like that. I'd rather stick with takeout. Amy huffed. Maybe you two haven't had to deal with it yet, but Vicky can burn water sometimes and Crystal's friends have weird tastes. It can't be that bad. Gloria protested, to which Amy just shrugged. Your funeral. While they were talking, I was slowly getting the sense something was up. We might not have been shopping at a super busy time, but there had still been people around, but I was seeing less and less of them. In fact, I saw one of the store workers grab a coworker and not so subtly tell them to go through a door after looking right at us. I didn't like that. We paid for everything and began heading for the door. When we made it out of the store with nothing actually happening, I almost wrote it off as just a bad feeling, only for an unfortunately familiar voice to call out to us. Excuse me, ladies. Do you have a moment to help a hero out on his mission for justice? Paladin had apparently decided to swing by. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 39. I glared up at the cheerfully blue sky. Gods or beings close enough that the difference was negligible might exist, but this was proof that they were malicious bastards. Would it really have been too much for no one to interrupt our shopping trip? I can assure you it won't take long. My self-proclaimed rival continued, heedless of the annoyance he was causing me. Sorry, we've got a lot of stuff here and my mom needs the car back in a few minutes. Maybe some other time? I could have called Gloria an angel. Too bad for heaven, though. I got her first. Too bad for me. Paladin couldn't take the hint we didn't want to talk. Oh, no worries. We can walk and talk at the same time. If you want, I could help carry something? No thanks. I denied immediately. Now if you don't mind, we have to get home. Ah, that's kinda what I wanted to talk about. I sighed and partially turned to face the white-clad hero. Look, if you need help getting home, I'm sure the protectorate can give you directions. If they can't help you for some reason, I'm sure the police will help if you ask them nicely. My peerage members chuckled at the joke, but to my mild annoyance. So did Paladin. Heh, funny Rias. No, I meant about the people staying in your home, he pressed on. The other heroes are really worried about Panacea and how you're not letting anyone talk to her. I also overheard some agents talking about how they're worried you might have kidnapped the mayor's niece. Oh, but don't worry, I don't believe that one. You're not really good about outing people's secret identities, are you? Amy scoffed with a raised eyebrow. Huh? What do you mean? She waved a hand at me. You said that Panacea was at her house, but that would only make sense if Rias was Lucifer. So you just outed her. It's not like she really hides it, though. Gloria muttered low enough that only we could hear. Sorry about that. It's just that I've always called her Rias. Well, I usually called her Rias Tan because it's cuter that way, but some of the guys from PR said not to use things like that because it might imply I support the ABB somehow. I don't really get it, but I've been trying. Anyways, sorry again. I guess it's a good thing no one else was around to hear that. Paladin suddenly spewed word vomit at my bishop. And you're new, but if you knew Rias was Lucifer, you're probably part of her peerage, right? Maybe another pawn? What's your name? But all we want is a wellness check on Panacea. She was really hurt the last time I saw her and my bosses just want to make sure she's okay. Maybe convince her to come in for some tests to prove there isn't any lasting damage from her injuries. I mean, I told them there wouldn't be, but they just want to be sure, you know? Did he not recognize Amy? Your wielder sure is something, White. Drake chuckled at his rival. Does he really not realize? I don't want to talk about it. Albion actually whined. Part of me wondered what Paladin was getting up to that made the white dragon sound so pitiful, but the rest of me simply wanted nothing to do with him. Amy seemed to be surprised that Paladin didn't recognize her, too. I mean, sure, she usually hid in the robe and scarf combo that made up her Panacea costume, so most people wouldn't recognize her at a glance, but for him to not notice who she was after directly talking to her. Amy. Bishop. She stammered a bit, a little lost at the sudden rush of words. Well, Miss Bishop, it's nice to meet you. Paladin gave her a bright smile and turned back to me. So, yeah, if you could have Panacea give us a call sometime? He can't be serious. I mentally directed to Drake, who just started cackling. It looked like my partner wasn't going to be much help in retaining my sanity. He seemed to be enjoying himself, though. You know what, fine. I'll ask her later. I sighed and put a hand on my forehead to try physically holding back the headache that was forming. And it's not like I was stopping her from talking to anyone, but if she doesn't want to talk to the PRT, I'm not going to make her. I pointedly did not look at Amy when I said this, because I didn't want the two brain cells bouncing around in Paladin's head to suddenly make the connection, but the small smile I saw out of the corner of my eye almost made up for the headache. Excellent. Another step complete in the eternal mission for justice. The hero cheered. Oh, by the way, do you think? And then he was interrupted by a ringing sound. 1 second. While Paladin was busy with his call, I subtly nudged Amy and Gloria off to the side and started preparing to teleport away. While Paladin didn't seem to be trying to do more than annoy us, the fact that everyone else had not so subtly cleared out still had me on edge. Sorry, citizens, but I have to go. It seems some dastardly villains are attempting to rob a bank. But don't worry, I'll be there to thwart them. Paladin declared as his holographic wings popped out of his back. We'll have to finish this conversation later, my rival. I'd rather we didn't, but if that meant he left, I wasn't going to complain too much. Good luck with that, I said, mostly to be polite. Paladin grinned and made a pose. Appreciated, but I'm a hero. We make our own luck. And with that he took off and headed off into the city, quickly vanishing over a rooftop. You know, that last line wasn't half bad. Gloria commented. Too bad he tries too hard the rest of the time. Please, he sounds like an extra from a Mouse Protector cartoon. Amy scoffed. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's painful is what you mean. Oh, come on, Amy, Gloria said, giving the grumpy bishop a nudge. Don't be upset just because he didn't recognize you. It was kinda cute. In a derpy golden retriever kinda way. Someone please help. My pawn is defective and I don't know if I can fix her. All right, come on, I said, pulling our shopping bags from the cart and dumping them in my storage space. Let's get back home before. Naturally, that was when a man in a black bodysuit with a red, demonic-looking mask with 2 stripes of green running down it suddenly appeared in front of me, holding a grenade out to me almost like he was presenting me with a gift. My eyes barely had time to widen before the world exploded with light and a wall of force slammed into me. A few seconds later I groaned and picked myself up off the street. That definitely hadn't been a normal grenade. Besides the fragments, any one of my peerage would have been able to mostly ignore an explosion that small. A quick check confirmed that both Amy and Gloria were fine. They didn't look hurt, more scuffed than anything. But they obviously felt that blast more than I did and were struggling to breathe thanks to getting the wind knocked out of them. But why the hell? The man in black appeared again, and now that I had more than half a second to actually look at him, I recognized him as Oni Lee, the second of the ABB's public capes and serial teleporting suicide bomber. I instinctively moved to cover my pawn and bishop, even though that didn't mean much when my opponent could teleport instantly, and glared at Lee. Something Oni Lee just ignored as he stared blankly at me. Well, what do you want? I snarled. Or is the ABB just looking to pick a fight? This is a reminder, Lee said placidly, that while you might have strength, it is the ABB that will control the bay. Play house with the capes you gather as you wish, but should we give the order, you will obey. Or what? I growled, the boosted gear appearing on my arm, gem glowing thanks to my heightened emotions. Oni Lee gave a signal, and about 20 people in gang colors carrying guns rushed out of the surroundings to surround us, some of them pointing their weapons at Amy and Gloria. Then some of the people surrounding you may suffer accidents. They don't seem to share your durability after all. Do we have an understanding? I thought I was mad before. Now my blood was practically boiling from anger. Oh, I understand. I understood I was going to have to crush the ABB for this. Oh. Crystal Pelham POV. It took a lot of self-control for Crystal to not stomp through the mansion slamming doors after the mildly disastrous call with her family. It had started off okay, a little tense because no one wanted to address the elephant in the room regarding Amy's situation, made a bit easier by her cousin deciding to just not be there. Which was another problem in Crystal's opinion, but not one she was ready to push just yet. There was some small talk, some meaningless chatter about how people had been over the last day or two, which inevitably revealed to the adults that the younger members of New Wave hadn't actually been in Brockton Bay for a week and tempers started flaring. Aunt Carol had called them all irresponsible for allowing a villain to kidnap them without even attempting to let someone else know where they were in case things went bad, which had Vicky snapping back about whether that included Amy or not since no one had even asked how she was doing. That had gone over about as well as you would expect, and everyone started speaking over the others for a while. More than once Crystal had thought about just ending the call and trying again some other day, but she also didn't want to keep freeloading in Rias's house. So she stuck things out. Tempers settled back down to a low simmer while Eric told their parents about the week they spent in Rias's mountain house, doing a good job of jumping from topic to topic so no one could start arguing again. Especially since it was obvious all the adults had done was either go to work or spend the day working with the PRT to break into Rias's house. As much as he hated it, as the baby of the family, everyone did treat him a little differently, so he could actually tell the story without people talking over him. Most of the time, those tempers flared again when at the end of Eric's recap the first thing her mom demanded was for them to meet up so they could all get checked out after getting into the fight with the cult's parahumans, and to check for any master influences. She had probably been concerned about them getting into a fight on their own, but at the time all Crystal could think was that they were accusing Rias of mastering them all and lashed out. Vicky had also demanded to know who they would even go to since the only healers in the bay besides Athala were in Rias's group. And outside of a truce, none of New Wave were going to trust a Nazi that was part of the same gang that had killed Aunt Jess. Maybe not even then. More shouting happened and the call ended when Vicky grabbed the phone to shout more directly into it, only to crush it in her hands accidentally. The last Crystal had seen of her, she was off begging Carl to take a look into fixing it. That still left her pissed off and fuming from the call, though, and she decided she needed to find her friends and hopefully decompress for a bit. Spend some time around people not dealing with any kind of drama and hope some of that calm rubbed off on her. So the heroine was a little surprised to see that not only was Rias back from her shopping trip, she, Amy, and Gloria all looked like they had gotten into a fight while they were out there. Something she might have expected from Rias, but definitely not from Amy. What happened? The ABB jumped us outside the store. Gloria answered quietly. Oni Lee told Rias personally that she needed to stay out of their way or they would target us. Crystal's eyes widened at that. She knew the bigger gangs would break the unwritten rules if they thought they could get away with it. More than one independent cape, both hero and villain, had quietly disappeared after annoying the ABB or E88. But usually they were more discreet about it than announcing they would kill a cape's friends if they didn't toe the line in public like that. Are you serious? No, sorry. Obviously you are. Crystal apologized. Rias, looking angrier than she had ever seen the other girl, was proof enough for that. What are you going to do about it? As she looked to the redhead, Crystal couldn't help but shiver at the look in her friend's eyes. For all that Rias came off as a trollish airhead sometimes, it was hard to forget that first fight where she casually tore through half the heroes in the city like it was nothing. First, I'm going to make a few plans, the devilish villain declared, gritting her teeth and glaring out a window towards the city. Then I'm going to burn the ABB to the ground. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 40. When I had told Crystal of my intention to crush one of the major criminal gangs in the city, I had half expected her to try and convince me to not do it. I was not expecting her to call her brother and start pitching ideas on how to help. Apparently everyone was in a violent mood today. I guess their call didn't go very well. Unfortunately, heightened emotions and a lack of any actual information about where the ABB gathered meant we weren't exactly productive. It was one thing to know certain businesses paid protection fees to certain gangs. It was another to do anything about it without hurting regular people. None of us had a convenient list of strongholds or meeting places we could crash, and the people that might have such things, the rest of New Wave and the PRT, probably wouldn't give them to us if we asked nicely. As time dragged on, the lack of any realistic plans to take down one of the biggest criminal groups in the city that had been firmly entrenched for years gave Crystal and Eric enough time to calm down enough to start asking why the ABB had suddenly decided to declare war on my group when they were at the weakest they had been since Lung took over, considering the same man was currently held prisoner by the PRT. It's probably a combination of things. I grumbled as I glared over a city map, trying to convince it to give me the answers I wanted by sheer willpower. They're a bit desperate thanks to their leader being captured, especially because without him they don't have a good way to hold off the Empire if they make a big push for territory. Oni Lee is a good threat and can cover a large area, but he's one person and the Empire has enough capes that they can afford to wear him out by making him fight continuously until he makes a mistake they can capitalize on. There's also the fact that my group is a little bit of a gray zone considering despite being villains, we keep hanging out with you guys in New Wave. The ABB is definitely gearing up to make a jailbreak on Lung and want us out of the picture. Threatening us and making us bunker down for a few days would be a good way to do that. I'd be willing to bet at least part of it is just ingrained arrogance, though. I sighed. When you can threaten people constantly and get away with it, it probably becomes second nature to do so. Crystal grimaced at that, but eventually nodded. I guess that makes sense. What I want to know, Amy muttered, is how they knew where we would be. I get Oni Lee showing up quick. He's a teleporter, but the rest of them? There were too many of them with too many weapons for that. You think someone tipped them off where we would be? Gloria asked. I mean, Paladin showed up really quick and wasted a bunch of our time. He doesn't hesitate to break the unwritten rules around Rias either. My bishop pointed out. Eric raised an eyebrow at his cousin. So you think he led the ABB to you guys? Isn't that a bit of a stretch? He is a protectorate hero, you know? You mean the same people that have been trying to break into Rias's house and capture her for committing the horrible crime of saving my life? I mean, that's not exactly what they are doing, but it doesn't make them sound good, huh? I decided to step in before things got sidetracked. As much as I don't want to defend Paladin, I don't think he was working with the ABB. If anything, I think we saved him from getting ambushed. Huh, what do you mean? Amy was right about there being too many gang members for it to be a quick response, but what if they weren't there for us? What if they followed Paladin so they could take him out and we just got in the way? Crystal frowned at me. Why would the ABB target Paladin? And even if they did, why would they hold back just because they saw you there? Because they are probably going to try and spring Lung soon, I pointed out. And Paladin's power is a pretty good short-term counter. Taking him out would give them a much better chance of breaking their boss out of his cell, but Paladin got called away before they could attack. Oni Lee could catch up to him easily, but if he got hurt in a fight, then I doubt the ABB could actually get close enough to Lung's cell. So instead, he decided to threaten us to save face with his minions. The faces of everyone else darkened as they considered my theory. No one liked the idea of Lung escaping when he was finally taken off the streets, and even worse, none of us were really in a position to do much about it. Part of that came from my villainous status, but even more came from the perception around our ages. No matter what, the PRT would take the involvement of a bunch of teenagers as a slap in the face. Even if we were on better terms, I had a feeling Pigott and Armsmaster would tell us that they had everything handled, and then shove us at the wards or younger protectorate members to handle while the adults dealt with the important things. So what? We just do nothing then? Gloria grumbled. We can't find a place to hit them, so they just get to walk off until they try to break out Lung? I shook my head. Not quite. We can't find a place to hit the gang directly, but we do know of a front they use that's important enough that Lung had to respond when it got hit. We do. Yep, the Ruby Dreams Casino. Lung was chasing after the thieves that robbed it on the night he was arrested. It was easy enough to check online and find a few posts about the robbery. PHO even had a few gang members on obvious throwaway accounts boasting about how they were going to make the robbers pay before the thread got locked down. Okay, so the casino is a front for the ABB. Crystal acknowledged. But what do we do about it? It's simple. We burn it to the ground. Rias, no. I winced as several people in the room shouted at once. Why not? I didn't whine, but I admittedly came closer than I'd like. Because that's arson? Crystal exclaimed. And we'll put dozens of normal people out of a job? Amy added on. Or because that will get the protectorate to drop everything and attack us? Gloria finished. At that point, only Eric hadn't chimed in, and when everyone looked at him, he just shrugged. What? I think it would be awesome. Let's do it. Idiot. Crystal rolled her eyes at her brother. But seriously, Rias, what are you thinking? I was thinking if we can't figure out where to find them, We make a big obvious attack on a location the ABB has responded to already and make them come to us. Either we give them a solid black eye and buy some time to find another location, or they try to stop us and we take a bunch of them down and maybe even cause issues for their planes to jailbreak Lung if we can take down Lee, or even just injure him a bit. Okay, that's a bit more reasonable. But you still can't burn down a casino? Ah, not even a little? I mean, everyone exchanged glances, and it said a lot about how pissed our group was that they were actually considering it. So I decided to give them a little push. How about this? We don't burn down the building, but instead we'll, I said, and started laying out my new plan. This one got much fewer protests and eventually got a green light from the heroic members of our group. Oh, the Ruby Dreams Casino wasn't actually in Brockton Bay, but was pretty close by. Something I was grateful for because that meant no one besides my peerage knew that I flubbed the teleport and appeared several miles away from where we wanted to go. It was easy enough for a quick flight where we needed to go, but the lack of people meant that the police or PRT shouldn't know where we were just yet. Assuming they didn't have some sort of thinker tracking me after the whole cult thing, which wouldn't actually surprise me if they did. There wasn't much I could do about that though, so I decided to focus on the present. I landed close to the front entrance and started walking up to the doors while Sam, Alex, Clover, and Gloria fanned out behind me. Amy didn't want to be seen doing something obviously villainous, and Carl was more interested in getting his workshop up and running. It was a bit of a bummer I wouldn't have my full peerage for my first intentional outing doing cape stuff, but honestly even just my 4 pawns were already overkill. I took one glance back over my shoulder just to make sure none of them were getting second thoughts about this. But between the eager grins on Alex and Clover's face, the angry frown on Gloria's, and the serious mien on Sam's, it was clear they were going to follow my lead. Okay then, game time. After one more deep breath, I lifted up a leg and kicked the large casino doors open. Necessary? Not really, but it did a good job of grabbing nearly everyone's attention really quickly. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I shouted over the sounds of the bells and whistles of the gambling machines. I apologize for the interruption, but we have some business to discuss with the manager. If you all could follow. I paused and gave Alex a pleading look, hoping she changed her mind, only to have that hope crushed when her smile just widened. Yellow Devil, to the side where you will be safe until our business is concluded. I sighed. Green Devil will be going around to make sure no one is missing, while Red and Blue will be accompanying me. And with that, I did my best to avoid cringing at the terrible names my peerage had decided to stick with and made my way towards the staff area where I eventually found an overweight, balding man in the office sweating at the fact he was alone with 3 parahumans, presumably robbing his building. Curiously, he wasn't Asian. I wasn't sure if that was intentional by the ABB to make their front a little more deniable, or if Lung didn't actually care about nationality as long as he got paid. Hello, Mr. Johansson. I greeted the man as I let the office door swing closed with a loud thunk. I know you probably aren't very happy to have us here, but I just need you to do one thing, and then we will get out of your. I paused as I looked at the thin wisps of hair on the man's head. Hands. Look, I don't want any trouble. I can give you the money we have in the vault, but after the undersiders robbed us the other month, we don't keep that much on site anymore. Johansson mumbled as he raised his trembling hands. Oh, don't worry. We're not here to rob you, I assured the man. We just want you to call out your ABB friends, and then we'll be on our way. But we don't have any ties to the ABB. You don't have to pretend. We aren't the cops or anything like that. Just give them a call and say that Lucifer is calling them out for their threat the other day, and we'll leave. I said again, adding just a touch of hypnosis to move things along. If I could, I would in a heartbeat. But I really have no way of contacting them. We aren't associated with the Asian bad boys in any fashion. Wait, what? I was just about to press him for details when a concerned-looking Sam opened the door with a cell phone in her hand. Hey, Lucifer, we have a problem. The Devil of Brockton Bay, Chapter 41. Well, this is a bit of a flusterduck, Clover commented as I paced the floor of the office we had commandeered. Gloria chuckled mirthlessly. That's an understatement if I've ever heard one. Privately, I agreed with her. Not only did it turn out that Ruby Dreams didn't have any connection to the ABB in general or Lung in particular, making my whole plan to use them to call out the gang in question utterly useless, But during the time we were away from the city, bombs had been going off all over the place seemingly at random. The ABB had already moved to Free Lung. I'd misjudged how much time we had and ended up wasting it thanks to relying on bad meta-knowledge. I sighed and did my best to pull myself together. Okay, I'd screwed up. So what? I could either waste time complaining about it or focus on the actual situation and do something about it. So let's think. What did I know for certain, and what did I think I knew but might be wrong? The ABB was bombing the city. Very likely they were going to try and free their leader. Whether that succeeded or not wasn't guaranteed with the new players in the bay, but I wouldn't be surprised if Lung escaped anyway. Bakuda, the ABB tinker responsible for their entire bombing campaign, was technically known to the public thanks to her trigger event as the Cornell bomber. Holding an entire college campus hostage with Tinkertech bombs was still newsworthy even in a world that had Endbringers and town-enslaving cults, but she hadn't done much since escaping and presumably getting recruited by Lung. And it was one thing to know a bomb tinker was coming. It was an entirely different thing to do anything about it. Bakuda could, and probably had, make her bombs look like normal everyday things or disguise them after the fact and scattered them around the city. She had effectively taken all of Brockton Bay hostage this time, and I wouldn't be surprised if the PR to let Lung escape out of hope he would rein her in if it looked like there was too much collateral damage to the public, even if they did manage to stop the initial breakout attempt. So that was two things I could confidently say I knew. Bakuda and the ABB were behind the bombings and Lung was most likely going to escape. Now what could have changed? Bakuda losing to the Undersiders. From what I remembered of that encounter, the entire fight had been one giant close call that only turned out in the Undersiders' favor because of Bakuda's arrogance. If she took them seriously from the beginning, or even just had slightly more willing help, there was no plot armor protecting the true storyline in this world. Amy wouldn't have died if there was. So there was a very good chance of the Bakuda winning that fight, and as much as I would like to make sure that didn't happen, I didn't have a clue where to find them if the fight hadn't ended already. I didn't remember off the top of my head where that encounter was supposed to go down either, and flying around looking for explosions when the city was full of them. Can't stop the breakout attempt. Can't stop the fight with the Undersiders. Okay, what can we do then? Earth to Rias, you still with us? Clover prodded me. Yeah, just thinking. Neat. You have a plan then? You all want to be involved then? There were nods and determined looks all around. Unsurprising, but I would have liked it if at least some of them wanted to sit out. Most of them were okay fighters at this point, and they would wipe the floor with the average gang member, but Explosions didn't really care about things like that. I have the concepts of a plan. I lied, but it was important to at least look confident to my peerage. Sam, did Crystal say what they were going to be doing? She and Eric were going to meet up with the rest of New Wave. Vicky and Amy were headed towards the hospital to help out. I guess their family feud had taken a back seat to the current emergency. Okay, I could work with that a bit. Any word on what Carl is doing? Trying to track down the detonation signal or something according to cries. Okay, so here's the plan. Gloria, I want you to head back to the hospital to help protect Amy. If it looks like someone is going to try and attack or detain her, get both her and Vicky out of there. I don't care who they say they are. I don't want her going off alone. Sam, Alex, and Clover, I want you three working with Carl to get in contact with emergency services. There's going to be a lot of blocked roads and fires because of this. See what you can do to help out. And if Carl finds a way to track the bomber's signal, make sure to let me know immediately. Got it. Alex snapped a salute followed by Sam, and Clover a half-second later in a way that I knew was to mess with me a bit, but I didn't mind because I'd take all the amusement in the moment I could. I probably wasn't going to get much more of it tonight. Gloria smiled and shook her head at the three before turning back to me. What are you going to be doing? I took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. I'm going to be flying around waiting to stomp the first idiot to try taking advantage of this mess into the dirt. The ABB, E88, Wiley, or any others out there. It didn't matter. Anyone trying to do anything but help was going to have to explain themselves very quickly or get worn as a boot. Charming. Drake commented. I'd make sure to wash your feet afterwards, though. It was hyperbole, you overgrown coin purse. And that was sarcasm, you airhead bat. Now focus on your minions. I rolled my eyes at the dragon but turned my attention back to the group. They didn't look thrilled that I was going off on my own when I was deliberately grouping everyone else up, but they didn't argue with me. The unfortunate truth was that I was simply faster on my own. If I had picked up a knight, things would be different, but I hadn't. And having the girls promote to one would just tire them out quicker and leave them vulnerable. Best save that as a trump card. I know things haven't exactly gone to plan today, but the main goals haven't changed much. Kick in the ABB's teeth if we can, and make sure everyone comes home safe. Things have just escalated a little bit. Understatement, much? Be careful and don't hesitate to call for help if you need it. I ignored the interruption and connected the 5 of us with my communication spell before teleporting all of us back into the city before quickly teleporting myself back to the manor. I stayed long enough to link Carl into the communication spell. The newest version could cover the whole city, and then randomly ported back into the city. Almost immediately, I saw the burned-out remains of several cars with a small crowd of bystanders standing nervously nearby. No one seemed to be doing anything but watching the fires, and I understood that. There didn't seem to be anything they could do about the flames, and if anyone had been in those cars and hadn't gotten out before they went up, well, they weren't worrying about it now. But the thing that sparked a dark feeling in my chest I didn't quite know what to call was the sight of the blackened and burning child seat in the back of one of the wrecks. Okay, let's see who's going to be the first Darwin Award winner for the night. Oh, Amy POV. By the time Vicky and Amy made it to Brockton General Hospital, the place was already preparing for the waves of patients the sudden explosions were no doubt going to cause. It said a lot of things about the city, and not many of them good, honestly. That this wasn't even the 10th time Amy had seen the hospital getting ready for a rush of injured people. But for the first time in a while, Amy isn't filled with bitter resentment and annoyance at the thought of dozens of injured people begging for her help. She feels nervous because she isn't the panacea anymore. She can't diagnose every problem at a touch and heal almost everything within minutes anymore. It takes more time, more information, more of everything really, and worst of all, it takes effort to heal now. Amy never needed to worry about things like that before. Before that building fell on her, she could keep healing as long as she could stay awake and focused. After, Amy knew that thanks to the bishop piece Rias used on her, Amy had the second largest magic reserves in their group. And even if healing was easier for her than other types of magic, she had a limit of what she could do now, just in time for some bomb psycho that could turn people to stone or remove their bones, or some other messed up shit to pop up. She shook those thoughts out of her head as she landed on the hospital's roof and made it all of 3 steps before freezing at the door. "Hey," Vicky said softly behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder with a gentle squeeze. "I've got your back." Amy appreciated that. The 2 of them entered the building and made a beeline for the nurse's station. Thankfully, the person manning the desk was not only one of the nurses Amy knew the name of, but also one of the less chatty ones as well. That meant that Amy should be able to. "Amy, is that you?" All thoughts were driven out of her head as Nurse Mary, one of the most stoic and brusque people Amy knew, practically ran over to pull her into a tight hug. "Blah. We heard about how you were caught in that attack, when no one saw you for so long. I'm glad the rumors were wrong. We're going to need you tonight." "They weren't completely wrong," Vicky commented while Amy was still blue screening from the sudden hug. "Amy got hurt bad. A friend managed to help her, but things happened that might cause issues." Amy extracted herself from the hug. "My powers changed. I don't know if I'll be able to do everything needed, but I can heal at range and do multiple people at once now." She went on to explain some of the differences. Mary was frowning by the end of it. "That's not great news. We've heard of some pretty wild things that conventional medicine might just not be able to do anything for, but I guess we'll just have to deal with it. But if you're still willing to help, we'll get you set up in your normal spot. We'll just have to hope for the best." "My powers changing won't cause the hospital issues?" Amy asked. "Your parahuman healing license is still good, and you're still providing care with your powers," Mary replied. "Legally, you're in the clear, and I know you wouldn't put others at risk. Frankly, we can't afford to be picky. We're desperate enough to let that robot help." "Robot? Nurse, where are the supplies I requested?" "The first ambulances are going to be returning soon." Amy turned to see what must have been one of Dr. Wiley's robots walking towards them with a scowl on his face. It might have been more intimidating if it was taller than 4 feet and not wearing a ridiculous red and teal coat that doubled as armor. Sandra is still getting everything together, medic man. Mary snapped back. You can either yell at me until she comes back, or you can go make yourself useful somewhere else. She turned to Amy and said in a softer voice, He is right though. We're about to be swamped. I'll call ahead and let the staff know you're coming and about your powers. Amy simply nodded and rushed to the ambulance bay with her sister trailing behind her. Her job would be making sure everyone arriving was stable enough to make it to an ER room. Weird that they let a villain's robot minion work in a hospital. Vicky muttered as the first ambulance's lights could be seen racing towards them. Hospitals have their own truce rules. Amy muttered back. Everyone helps out unless your group is the one causing the crisis. Doesn't happen here much because Athala was the only other cape in the bay that could heal, and she can't be seen helping undesirables outside of an Endbringer fight. Then there was no more time to talk as the first ambulance threw open its doors and Amy got her first patient of the night. Do I have your permission to heal you? It was spoken more out of habit than anything else. Thousands of repetitions made it so Amy barely even noticed she asked. But now she felt a bit of her demonic power stretching out, waiting for an answer. Rias had mentioned this when she had given everyone the rundown on their new species. The ability to make deals with people in exchange for helping grow their own power, a tiny bit along with whatever else was offered. Before she could take it back, the person accepted and Amy felt a small compulsion to heal them. Thankfully, it was just 2 broken bones and not too draining. And the second she finished, she felt almost all the energy she spent healing return to her, about 80% or so, and the instinctual knowledge that her own power had grown just a sliver. Amy needed to use this. If making deals could extend how long she could heal for, it would be criminal to let it go unused. But she was going to have a long discussion with Rias after this was over about what could be considered a deal in the future. She was getting tired of new things getting sprung on her in the middle of a crisis.